Most men don't lose their women. They lose themselves first. It doesn't happen in a moment you can point to. It happens quietly, through small decisions that feel responsible at the time. You chose stability over edge. You chose predictability over tension. You chose harmony over friction. None of that felt like a mistake. It felt like growing up, becoming dependable, becoming the man she could rely on. And you did exactly what was expected of you. You showed up. You handled problems. You became consistent. But somewhere along the way, something else faded, and no one warned you it would matter. Marriage didn't destroy your masculinity. Misidentification did. You started confusing the role you played with the man you were. You optimized yourself to be needed instead of felt, useful instead of magnetic, safe instead of solid. And the shift was so gradual, you didn't notice it happening. You became reliable. You became safe. And somewhere in that process, you stopped being dangerous. Not reckless, not toxic. Dangerous in the way that creates polarity, in the way that makes presence felt instead of assumed, in the way that reminds her there is a man here, not just a function. You didn't stop caring. You didn't stop loving. You didn't stop trying. You just slowly traded tension for comfort, and comfort for approval, until your identity narrowed into a role. From the outside, everything looks fine. You're doing what a good husband is supposed to do. Inside, something feels flatter than it used to, less alive, less sharp. This isn't about blame. It's about recognition. Because the moment you understand what was lost, you stop searching for answers in the wrong place. The role trap doesn't snap shut all at once. It tightens slowly, disguised as responsibility. It starts when you prioritize stability, because stability feels mature. You take fewer risks, not because you're afraid, but because you're thinking long-term. You optimize for harmony because conflict feels unnecessary, even childish. You learn how to anticipate her moods, smooth over friction, adjust yourself so the system runs quietly. From the outside, this looks like growth. From the inside, it feels like control. But what's really happening is compression. Your range narrows, your edges soften, and you don't notice because nothing is technically wrong. Roles demand consistency. That's their nature. A role works when it's predictable, reliable, repeatable. Masculinity doesn't operate on that axis. Masculinity requires tension, not chaos, not volatility, but contrast. It needs the sense that something is alive, moving, not fully known. When you optimize yourself into a role, you trade tension for efficiency. You become easier to read, easier to manage, easier to assume. Over time, assumption replaces presence. She doesn't feel you arrive anymore. She expects you to be there. And expectation is where attraction quietly begins to starve. You see this in real life constantly. Men who say, "I just wanted peace," and got it. Men who removed every source of friction and can't understand why desire faded along with the noise. They didn't become weak. They became optimized. They turned themselves into solutions instead of forces. The problem isn't that you became a husband. The problem is that you let the role consume the identity underneath it. When a man becomes a role before he remains a force, attraction begins to starve. Not because she's ungrateful, because her nervous system no longer feels contrast. If you want to apply this insight, stop asking what you need to do more of and start asking what you've removed. Where did you eliminate uncertainty in the name of safety? Where did you smooth yourself out to avoid disruption? Where did you trade edge for approval? This isn't about reintroducing conflict. It's about reintroducing depth. A man with depth doesn't need to be unpredictable. He needs to be non-reducible. When your identity can't be compressed into a role, presence returns. And presence is the soil attraction actually grows in. The most damaging confusion men fall into is mistaking being needed for being desired. They look similar on the surface, but psychologically, they live on opposite ends of the spectrum. Being needed is about utility. You solve problems. You provide stability. You make life function. Being desired is about polarity. It's about tension, charge, and the feeling that something is alive between two people. When a man confuses the two, he doubles down on usefulness and unknowingly starves the very thing that created attraction in the first place. In real life, this plays out quietly. She relies on him. She trusts him. She respects him. He handles responsibilities without complaint. He's emotionally available, consistent, and present. From a rational standpoint, he's doing everything right. And yet, desire fades. Not because she stopped valuing him, but because value and desire are not the same currency. Utility creates appreciation. Polarity creates longing. One makes you indispensable. The other makes you irreplaceable. When a relationship becomes dominated by need, desire slowly gets crowded out. You see this in men who say, "She needs me," and they're right. She does. But need doesn't generate attraction. It generates dependence. Dependence is stable, but it's flat. It doesn't create that internal pull that says, "I want this, not because I have to, but because something in me responds to it." Over time, the man becomes essential, but invisible. His presence is required, not felt. His effort is acknowledged, not desired. And the more he senses the distance, the more he leans into being needed, because that's where he still gets confirmation of his value. She appreciates the husband. She misses the man. That line stings because it names something most men feel but can't articulate. Appreciation is warm, but it's not electric. Respect is important, but it's not arousing. When polarity disappears, attraction doesn't announce its departure. It just stops responding. If you want to apply this insight, stop asking how to be more useful and start examining where polarity collapsed. Where did you become predictable instead of present? Where did you prioritize being indispensable over being felt? This isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about reclaiming the part of you that creates tension, depth, and presence. Because a man who is only needed will eventually feel taken for granted. A man who is desired is never reduced to a function. The first invisible shift is emotional overexposure, and it's one of the most misunderstood mistakes men make. You start explaining everything, how you feel, why you feel it, what you're thinking. You process out loud, believing that openness equals intimacy. You share every internal movement as if transparency itself will keep the connection alive. But transparency without containment kills mystery. When nothing is held back, nothing is felt. Your inner world becomes fully accessible, fully predictable, and therefore less charged. She doesn't feel you as a presence to lean into. She reads you like a report. Emotional availability turns into emotional flatness when there's no depth left to discover. The second shift is approval orientation, and it often hides behind good intentions. You begin adjusting yourself to avoid conflict. You soften opinion. You anticipate reactions. You ask emotional permission before making decisions, not because you lack direction, but because you want harmony. Over time, your center moves from internal to relational. You stop acting from conviction and start acting from calibration. When a man seeks approval, polarity collapses, not because women want cruelty or dominance, but because attraction requires a grounded center. A man who constantly checks whether he's okay loses that center. He becomes responsive instead of directive, agreeable instead of anchored, and without anchoring, tension dissolves. The third shift is predictability replacing presence. The routines settle in. Same schedule, same reactions, same availability. You're always reachable, always accommodating, always emotionally in the same place. Reliability turns into assumption. Assumption turns into invisibility. Presence isn't about being there physically. It's about being felt psychologically. When everything about you can be predicted, your presence stops registering as information. Desire dies fastest in environments with no uncertainty, because the nervous system has nothing left to respond to. There's no edge, no friction, no sense that something is happening now. You see these shifts in real life in men who did everything right and still feel something slipping. They didn't withdraw, they didn't neglect, they over-adapted. If you want to apply this awareness, don't swing to the opposite extreme. This isn't about secrecy, conflict, or distance. It's about restoring containment, conviction, and variability. Hold parts of your inner world without performing them. Act from principle without seeking permission. Let your availability have shape instead of being constant. These shifts don't require speeches or confrontation. They require restraint, and restraint is often what brings presence back into the room. Women don't respond by withdrawing because they're punishing good men. That explanation is comforting, but it's wrong. Punishment requires intention. What's happening here is adaptation. Her nervous system is responding to an environment that no longer generates signal. Attraction is not a moral decision. It's a physiological response to contrast, tension, and presence. When those elements fade, her system doesn't argue with logic or loyalty. It simply recalibrates. That recalibration looks like withdrawal, but it isn't rejection. It's redirection. Most women don't wake up deciding to lose desire for a man they respect. They don't sit down and evaluate his goodness and choose indifference. What they experience instead is a gradual flattening. The man is still there, still caring, still responsible, but nothing inside her is being activated anymore. Her nervous system stops responding, not because he's inadequate, but because he's become static, predictable, fully known. When stimulation disappears, the system seeks it elsewhere, even if only internally through fantasy, distraction, or emotional distance. Her attraction didn't shut off. It redirected away from what felt static. You see this in real relationships all the time. Women who say, "I love him, but I don't feel anything," and genuinely mean it. Women who feel guilty because nothing is technically wrong, yet something is missing. They're not rejecting the man. They're responding to an environment that no longer challenges. surprises, or engages them on a nervous system level. This isn't about drama or chaos. It's about movement. Attraction responds to what feels alive, not what feels managed. If you want to apply this understanding, stop personalizing the withdrawal as a verdict on your worth. It's feedback about the dynamic. Ask where things became overly optimized, overly predictable, overly safe. Ask where tension was removed in the name of peace. This isn't an invitation to provoke or destabilize. It's an invitation to reintroduce depth. Depth comes from a man who is anchored in himself, not oriented around being needed or approved of. When you understand withdrawal as adaptation, not punishment, your response changes. You stop pleading. You stop defending your goodness. You stop chasing reassurance. And when that stops, something else becomes possible, because attraction doesn't respond to effort. It responds to presence. The worst correction men make is doubling down on effort the moment they sense attraction slipping. They work harder. They show up more. They try to prove their value through consistency, support, and emotional availability. On paper, this looks like commitment. Psychologically, it does the opposite of what they intend. Effort without polarity reads as pressure, not presence. It reinforces the very dynamic that caused desire to flatten in the first place. More reassurance usually comes next. You explain yourself. You affirm your love. You ask if everything is okay and offer to fix whatever isn't. She gives you answers because answers are easy. She tells you you're good, that she appreciates you, that nothing is wrong. But reassurance doesn't generate attraction. It numbs anxiety while leaving the underlying dynamic untouched. Each request for reassurance quietly flips the polarity. You become the one seeking emotional validation, and she becomes the one supplying it. That inversion alone weakens desire further. Then comes more emotional availability. You open up more. You share more. You process more. You believe that if she just understands you deeply enough, closeness will return. But closeness is not the same as attraction. Emotional availability without containment dissolves tension. It makes everything accessible, understandable, and safe. Safety stabilizes relationships. It does not reignite desire. You can't negotiate desire into existence by explaining how much you care. This fails because desire doesn't respond to logic or effort. It responds to polarity. You either generate it or you don't. Polarity comes from a grounded center, not from performance. When you respond to withdrawal by giving more, you collapse what little contrast remains. You remove uncertainty. You remove edge. You signal that nothing about you is at stake except keeping the relationship comfortable. If you want to apply this insight, resist the reflex to overcorrect. Stop adding effort where direction is missing. Stop offering reassurance where presence is required. Pull your energy back into yourself without withdrawing from life. Focus on restoring your center, not managing her feelings. Men who reverse the dynamic don't do it by convincing anyone of their worth. They do it by becoming non-negotiable in who they are again. And when polarity returns, desire has something to respond to without being asked. What restores the man isn't tactics or performance. It's alignment. This isn't about becoming alpha or adopting a new persona. It's about returning to what was there before the role swallowed the core. A husband is a role. A man is a center. When the role becomes the identity, everything collapses inward. When the core leads and the role follows, polarity returns without effort. Identity before role means you stop defining yourself by how well you perform inside the relationship and start anchoring yourself in who you are, regardless of it. Your values, your direction, your standards exist before and beyond marriage. When those are alive, the relationship feels them automatically. The second principle is emotional containment. This doesn't mean emotional shutdown. It means structure. You feel deeply, but you don't spill everything the moment it arises. You don't process every fluctuation out loud. You don't outsource your internal regulation to the relationship. Containment creates depth. It gives your emotions weight instead of noise. In real life, this looks like a man who is expressive but not reactive, present but not porous. His inner world isn't hidden, but it isn't on display either. That balance is what restores mystery without secrecy and intimacy without collapse. The third principle is directed life energy. When your life orbits the relationship, attraction suffocates. When the relationship meets you in motion, attraction breathes. Motion doesn't mean chaos or constant change. It means purpose. Your attention is pulled forward by something you're building, refining, or pursuing. She joins that trajectory instead of becoming the center of it. Men who restore this don't threaten or withdraw. They simply become oriented again. Their time has shape. Their energy has direction. Their presence feels earned, not guaranteed. You see this shift in men who stop asking how to get desire back and start asking how to live correctly again. The relationship responds because it finally has something to respond to. When a man returns to his center, desire doesn't need to be chased. It recognizes what's in front of it. This is the final reality check, and it's the part most men try to skip because it removes every comfortable excuse. Becoming a husband isn't the mistake. Forgetting to remain a man is whoopus. No woman kills desire in a man. He trades it away for comfort, one choice at a time. He chooses ease over edge, predictability over presence, approval over direction. And none of those choices feel destructive in the moment. They feel responsible, mature, loving. That's why this loss goes unnamed for so long. By the time it's felt, it's already structural. Ownership here doesn't mean self-blame. It means clarity. You stop pointing at her withdrawal, her mood, her distance, and start examining the environment you helped create. An environment where you became fully known, fully available, fully safe. Where nothing about you generated tension anymore because everything about you could be assumed. That environment doesn't make you a bad man. It makes you invisible. And invisibility is what starves desire, not cruelty or neglect. You've seen this play out in other men. The ones who did everything right and still felt something hollowing out inside them. The ones who said, "I don't recognize myself anymore," long before their relationship reflected it back. This isn't about becoming colder or harder. It's about becoming grounded again, reclaiming the part of you that exists outside the role, the part that moves forward regardless of who's watching. When you do that, You don't need to demand attraction. You don't need to argue for respect. You simply become present in a way that can't be ignored. This message lands because it isn't wrapped in ideology or posturing. There's no red pill rage here, no alpha theatrics, no blaming women for natural responses. It speaks directly to men who feel unseen and unfelt, inside lives that look fine on the outside. It names a loss most men feel but never articulate. What happens next depends on whether you reclaim your identity or keep hiding behind a role that no longer feeds you or her.